You know, in your opinion, is there such a thing as overusing a product like Facebook?
I think there is probably a thing with overusing any product, probably even eating broccoli. I think you can probably overdo that too. What I see as exciting about technology and what I think is the mission of a lot of companies, including Facebook, is about how we can try and harness what it is that people do, what it is that's natural to the social interactions of people, and use technology to amplify that and to do that in a way that is valuable. And I think we define value as, is this something that is, you know, if you were to survey people, ask people, is this something that feels net positive to them? And I think this is one of the things that, you know, is very important for us in thinking about Facebook and thinking about engagement and thinking about how we grow the service, is never losing sight of the question around value and overall talking about, you know, is this something that is good for the world overall?
And so do you think we have a special responsibility for products that are potentially or easily overused or are really designed to be engaging? Do we have any special responsibilities?
I think we absolutely do. I think that keeping the question of value top of mind is one. One of the things that we do is, you know, we regularly survey people. We ask people questions about, you know, what it is that they actually find valuable about Facebook, what it is that makes them feel good about it, what is it that makes them feel bad about it. And this is something that we track pretty regularly, that we're always kind of looking at and making sure that, like, this is a thing that continues to go up over time rather than going down, so that we don't focus on optimizing for you know, short-term gains or optimizing for something that isn't actually contributing to the question of value.
Mm-hmm. Does Facebook do anything for the people who are using it too much? I mean, if Facebook knows, do they do it? Does the company do anything for those folks?
We don't, not in the sense that we like track, okay, you know, who are the, you know, top people and how much time are they spending on Facebook. I don't think we actually look at things at that granularity, just because it's a little bit creepy to, I think, be like mining data at that granularity. I think what we look at is overall things like time spent, engagement, and of course sentiment. That is one of the top things that we currently look at across all of the different products. So sentiment on games on Facebook, sentiment on newsfeed, you know, the engine that powers all of the information on Facebook, sentiment on how it feels to use the mobile product versus the desktop product. And so it's trying to dice it down to, you know, these are the products that we build, these are the things that we think, you know, ought to be valuable, and just making sure that at a high level that is actually what we're tracking.
Mm-hmm. So something that I'm guessing Natasha would agree with is that the proportion of people who go too far with these type of technologies is very small, whether it's you know, social games like a Zynga game or Angry Birds, or even with slot machine gambling, it's a small percentage, and I'm guessing the same would be on Facebook as well. Tell us about, for the majority of users, how do you kind of think about designing for habit? How do you think about designing for engagement from the very early stages? You know, when you're thinking about rolling out a new feature, what does that process look like?
Yeah, so I think we think about features in two different ways. The first is sort of more organic. You know, we run a lot of company-wide hackathons, and a lot of the ideas there tend to come from, you know, developers, engineers, designers, whoever, feeling like, oh, this is something that I would love to use. You know, this is something that is a problem in my life, and I want to solve it. And so here's an idea. And, you know, through hackathons, we've had a number of products become real product initiatives. I think video was a hackathon, chat, you know, many years ago, search, type-ahead search. A lot of that stuff evolved from sort of this more organic, people designing, you know, something that they thought was missing. Recently, I think one of the other frameworks that we use, we call it, you know, it's sort of it's called understand, identify, execute, and this is sort of us taking a little bit of step back, realizing that, you know, we have a much more diverse user base, and so if you're always going to like look at like how I use things or how, you know, my coworkers use things, you know, we may only be designing for a very small subset of people in the grand scheme of the world, right? I mean, we all live here, you know, we're of a certain demographic, we live here in Silicon Valley, we work at a tech company. And so it's become more and more important to us, to our company, to Facebook, to make sure that we actually understand at a much broader scale how people around the world are using Facebook. And so to that end, and we do a lot more user research. We're doing a lot more sort of thing like look at analytics, and through user research you learn about all the different ways that people either stumble through your current product or opportunities where the value that you're trying to provide could be made easier to use or could be made more accessible. So I think from, how do we get started with new products? It either comes from a place of like, what is the additional value that we're looking to create? What is a problem that is currently, not being addressed or maybe not being addressed in the best manner, and what could we build to solve that? And then alternatively looking at, okay, here are the products that we currently have, and this is the value that we're trying to deliver. What is impeding the ease of use of these products? And then looking for ways to continue to improve and refine things like ease of use.
So I tweeted out, what question should I ask you in preparation for the Habit Summit? And many people wanted to know specifics about the metrics you use. Mm-hmm. And how you greenlight projects based on those metrics.
Yeah, I think I actually don't think we usually greenlight projects based on because a lot of times you have to like build it first and then you have to realize how well does it work. We generally greenlight projects based on is there a narrative, like the kinds of questions that we ask are, hey, you have this idea, you want to go build this new feature. How do you see someone using this? Why would somebody use this? And what's the story? If I were to pitch this to my mother or my roommate, what would I tell them about what we built that would make it seem exciting? Like, oh yeah, I would definitely want to use that. I can definitely see why that would solve the whatever problem that I'm having, or fulfill something that I would want. And so a lot of it, at least, and this is sort of the like leap of faith in the beginning. We're trying to invest in a new product idea is to kind of take a step back and make sure we have like a narrative there that makes sense, that everyone's like, yeah, I could see how this would work. When it comes to just sort of on more of the hey, we have a feature, maybe it's newsfeed or maybe it's photos, and we're looking we're adding a additional change to how it works or to our ranking algorithm, then that's sort of we're doing that because we want to improve ease of use, or and a lot of that stuff down the line can be a little bit more measurable. So in those cases we might be running A/B tests, we might be inviting users into our lab to play with this new feature and actually see them walk through it. Maybe we had a feature and maybe it was hard to understand, so we really focused on making the new user experience a lot easier, and that's something where if we can bring in 20 people and have them walk through it, we have a good sense of whether or not this is actually working. Our assumption was that this is going to make it easier to learn. Is that actually true? Let's watch and make sure that that is.
So are engagement metrics or any kind of habit metrics part of that process? Are you looking to see what happens?
When we test things via A/B testing, then usually we have like certain things we're looking at. This might be sentiment. That's something that we often do measure. It might be something like engagement. Engagement we might measure through how many people are contributing to the conversation, like liking, commenting. We might look at things like time spent overall. If we're creating something that's supposed to be, if especially with I think. Anything that we do with ranking, right? We want to make sure that if we're going to, have a better algorithm for showing you content that you're interested in, the way we would know if it was more interesting is if you engage more with the content or you spend a little bit more time, like reading, more stories. And those are the types of things that we might measure depending on what it is that we're looking to solve.
So along with the many things that you do as a designer and as an executive, you also write. Mm-hmm. And I read your blog post on Medium. Mm-hmm. About these two ways of looking at product. Can you kind of walk us through?
Yes, and this stemmed out from a lot of my own observations and talking to a bunch of people about building products. And I come from a design background, and a lot of the people I work with are designers, and I feel like designers do tend to look at problems a certain way, and that way tends to be very, very at an individual or personal level. And so, a lot of designers, I think take it to extreme, it could mean that you're just designing for yourself, but I think what designers are good at are is intuitively kind of understanding, hey, here's a person, here's their life, here's not just what they, but here's how, what they do in the morning, and here's how, what I'm doing for lunch, and here's the reasons why I would take out my phone, and here's all of the things that I care about. And so if I'm going to design something, it has to resonate with that picture of an individual, whether that individual is me or my friends or my mother or somebody else. And I feel like the view is always on an individual basis. And if you're debating designs with a designer, it usually tends to be like, well, I don't know if it's realistic that that person would be in this situation and they would take out this, their phone and do, it's always like a very individual story. And I think this is also why designers, gravitate a lot towards like watching user research, because observation of people and of how they, use a product, or how they, live throughout their life, or how they talk about what they like and don't like. Those are very, very strong signals into how a designer thinks about designing. And I kind of noticed that on the other side, you have maybe PMs or analysts or other folks who are actually looking at things from a much broader view, not necessarily individual people, but more populations or a broader market. And this is where a lot of times when I hear like VC pitches or whatnot, people tend to talk about the size of the market, or this is a trend that's fast growing. Right now we're talking a lot about ephemeral sharing, or anonymity, or like apps that sort of have these properties, right? And these are sort of broader market trends. There's a lot of examples of apps that are doing that. There's a lot of examples of conversations, in the blogosphere about that. And at a macro scale too, you start looking at like a lot of like data at scale. So how many, what do teens think? Like, where is the teen demographic like gravitating towards? And those things are also, this is a very it's a super valuable view, because I think the downside with focusing too much on individuals is, again, you may not actually be designing for the right, the problems you're designing for may not actually be widespread, or you may be missing out completely on how a whole other swath of the world thinks. And so having a blend of both understanding markets, trends, demographics, things at a very, very broad level, understanding data at scale, but also bringing it back to okay, why would a person actually want this? What problem does it solve for this person that is a very real, has their own life, is a real person? Would they find this compelling? And I think having a blend of both is, I think the best way to approach any kind of product development question.
So do you do that per designer? Should the designer think macro and micro, or is it the team needs to think both macro and
I
micro?
think the team really needs to think macro and micro. I think it's advantageous for designers to also, this is, one of the biggest pieces of feedback I tend to give designers is, okay, I understand, you and you're designing for a person that looks like you, but do you understand, is this how do you know that this problem that you're describing is actually a problem that a lot of people have? And a lot of times when you ask that question, sometimes you can go out and do a little research, maybe look up, do a little bit of data analysis and actually understand whether that is or isn't. There's ways to verify assumptions, or maybe it's by doing a little bit of user research and going out and study, or just just having an idea that actually this isn't just an isolated need. It's something that is a little bit broader. I think that designers understanding how to look at the broader audience or the broader market, it's really important.
So as a note, we'll be opening up for Q&A soon, so if you want to head to the mics, feel free. Let's talk about the habits of designers, mm-hmm. and if you think there are any particular habits that you've picked up along the way or that you look for in teammates mm-hmm. that really make for great designers.
Yeah, I think there are two main ones. I think the first is designing with the problem in mind, and the best way that I've found to do that is to actually ask or suggest to designers who are about to embark on designing a new product or designing a new feature to kind of write a one-page document on what's the problem, what do we actually think is the issue, what do we kind of think is a solution, and sort of frame their thoughts around the scope of this design problem and getting it down on paper. Because I think the process of doing that, of sitting down and thinking, okay, what is the actual high-level problem? And this isn't a whole like giant essay. It's probably just a couple paragraphs. Maybe it's one sentence that kind of talks about like the vision statement. Maybe it's like a couple sentences that talk about like what is the problem today and why we think building this feature is going to solve these problems. I think that is the first one, because I think this gets back to intentionality and like on honing in on making sure that we're working on something valuable, right? That's the first thing. The second, I think, habit is just sharing your work. As a designer, it's so important that you are able to put your work in front of other designers, in front of engineers, whoever at the company, anybody on all teams, both people who are working on the project, but also people who maybe aren't super deep in it, who can kind of see it from like, oh, fresh eyes, new perspective. I think if you are a designer who sort of can't show it to anyone until it's perfect or until you think it's perfect, you're kind of losing out on a lot of great opportunities for feedback, for probing questions from other people, and for just a lot of opportunities for people to kind of challenge the thinking and make sure that all of the decisions that you're making are really intentional. So I think those are probably the two most important habits for designers. Share your work, show it early and often, and also start projects by sitting down and having a little bit of time to think through the intentionality of the problem.
Where does filtering fit into all that? Especially with a product that does so much like Facebook's, how do you decide what will be a distraction versus what should be it?
You mean in terms of like scoping a problem, or do you mean like when you get feedback from like 1,000 people, how do you know who to listen to?
Well, I'm thinking in terms of Facebook could do so much.
Yeah.
There's some infinite amount of things that you could put into a platform type product like Facebook. How do you make those decisions to filter out what one designer thinks would be a great thing for their life, and they're inspired and they have the narrative, they have the entire story of why they need it, versus the bigger picture of serving 1 in 8 people on the planet?
Yeah, I think the way that we look at it is like, I think there's actually a more systematic way to approach it, right? I think like when we look at like a company like Facebook, right? Clearly we can embark on a lot of different projects. We do have a lot of teams. We do look at a lot of different initiatives. I think we try and make sure that the bulk of what we work on, or the number of if you consider by like time, investment, number of people, we want to make sure we're working on the core thing. And the core thing is the thing that is providing value to our over 1 billion people who use Facebook all around the world. And that means investing in where of that set of people, like, guess what? Like a huge percentage of them now are, in developing markets, and they might be using Facebook on feature phones or on, Androids that aren't the high-end, Android devices that we all carry around in our pockets. And it's important that we internalize that and we develop empathy for that. And so, probably I would say 75% of our company's investment is going to be in just understanding this group of people that use Facebook and making sure we are constantly improving the product for them across all of the different ways that we use it. Then I think about 20% of our investment is going to be in sort of new areas of development, 20 or 30%. And sort of like, this is where, we might look at like, well, where are things headed in 3 years, right? Like, obviously, technology is going to get better. We're all carrying around, maybe like a lot of the world's carrying around feature phones today. That's not going to be the case in 3 years. In 3 years, all the devices that we are carrying now will be like the lowest end devices. And so we definitely still need to be investing in where we think things are going. And if that, that means like working on something that isn't going to be maybe applicable to everyone at scale at first, but it represents sort of more of a long-term investment and development. And I think just having that understanding, like not just sort of going out and being random about it, but being like, here is the set of things that we need to continually improve, and that's the core. And here's a set of things that we think are going to be really meaningful and exciting and going to be the norm in 3 years. And let's make sure that we have teams investing in those projects. And let's also make sure that we don't, hold the success of those projects on the same criteria, because it's not about getting to 1 billion users off the bat. It's about making sure we have the right infrastructure and that we're demonstrating these things are valuable, if only to a small subset to begin with.
Is that decision made top down or through committee? How do you decide what's going to be something that's important in 3 years?
We tend to actually try and push down as much decision making to the core teams as possible. So, at Facebook, like let's say, there's a team that works on photos, right? And inside of that, there's a team that works on, how you get photos, into the system, and that's all of the upload flows, and that's looking at, maybe offline posting, and that, and so and that's going to be a pretty small team, probably like one designer, a couple engineers, an engine manager, a PM, and so, at the level of like the photos team looks at all of the ways in which, photos should be better and comes up with a bunch of ideas and sets their roadmap, and then the roadmaps get reviewed on like a quarterly or maybe half-year basis, or and just to make sure that the overall direction makes sense, at a very high level. And so, in terms of a lot of the like day-to-day decisions, because the people who work on the products are going to have the most context and sort of understand, what is the best thing for their decisions. But all of those things, do go through regular reviews just to make sure that the company strategy is consistent at the top level.
Okay, great. I see we have some people lining up, so why don't we take our first audience question?
Can you talk a little bit about the tools or methods you use to measure sentiment?
Yes, this is still a work in progress. So I think probably many companies are trying to I think A/B testing was what everyone was talking about like a couple of years ago, and now a lot more at least conversations I've had with people at different companies is more about like how do you measure sentiment. I think. For us, we do it a variety of different ways. We'll run surveys, and that we have a set of questions that we're constantly asking, and we try and make sure we're picking the right subset of random users. So we have coverage across the entire user base, and so we do that with surveys. Sometimes we might have a panel. So for a particular feature, it might be important for us to understand the extremes, like the people who maybe have the best and worst experiences, and so we might invite people to participate in like a couple month-long panel where it's the same people, but we ask them, we maybe give them a more comprehensive set of questions that they answer on a monthly basis or something. I think we also do for more usability testing stuff, we will go out and talk to a particular, we'll find a small group of people and have them do maybe more in-depth like diary studies or, use a product and then set up focus groups. So those are all of the different tools that we use for different purposes.
Thank you.
Hi, I just had a question about the design process and when you guys bring the engineers in, how do you guys work with the engineers? Like, do they start the brainstorming with designers?
Yeah, I would say it probably varies on the type of problem. For example, a problem where maybe we're looking for maybe for something like growth, right? It's like maybe we want to brainstorm, a bunch of ways that we might grow Facebook in Japan, right? And so a problem like that, you kind of want to be very, very generative. You kind of want to try out and get like a bunch of different ideas and then, have kind of a group brainstorm. And so for something like that, it really makes sense, I think, to have everyone on the team, have a session, participate in, like sticky notes on the wall and like putting together a bunch of ideas, and then the team together vetting and voting and narrowing it down to like, okay, well, here's maybe 10 ideas and we're going to try them all, or we're going to go through and go through that work. But another problem, or a different set of problem where it's like a little bit more ambiguous, and it's a little bit more like we need a vision for X, and X could be like, we need a new way of like we need to really think about like what is the new feature that's going to distinguish messaging or whatever it is, right? Something where it's going to require like a person or a small group of people to kind of do like a lot more deep thinking and a lot more deep design exploration. That I think it's harder to do in a big group because you might be killing ideas too quickly, or just you kind of need to like explore the breadth of the space. So usually in those cases, it might be like a designer or a couple designers who put together a lot of ideas, and then as soon as they have like a number of ideas to then present to the team and kind of get feedback at more concrete stages of the design process.
Thanks.
Hi, thanks for coming to talk to us today. So you mentioned looking forward in technology and that, the smart devices that we have are obviously not the end of the curve. I was wondering if you could comment a little bit on that further, maybe in light of the acquisition of Oculus Rift announced today.
Yeah, I don't have a ton to comment on regarding Oculus, other than I'm very excited, and I think that I think some of the technology and some of the stuff that they're doing is one of the things that we think it may be really exciting and maybe much more common. I'm also personally, I think I'm very excited about just a lot more different form factors for technology, like wearables or other ways in which we can integrate a device much more seamlessly through our person. So it's not always like I have to take out a big phone from my pocket to do anything. I think this is like a really exciting area of development. I think it'll be great to see where that goes in a couple of years.
Are you a self-tracker? Do you use any of these devices?
I do. I use a Fitbit, and I'm pretty big on Fitbit.
How long have you used it for?
Probably like 2 years.
2
actually.
years,
yeah,
wow.
2
So
or
you
3
are
years.
part of that 50% that Daniel showed us keeps using their product.
Exactly. Yeah.
And what do you, as a designer, seeing these wearable technologies? I mean, what do you? Does anything bother you about these, or anything you wish you could see out of these products?
Yeah, I think the overall, I think right now we still have a tendency to look at a lot of wearable products like in isolation. Like here is the, like a watch, or here's like, glasses, and what can it do in that form factor? And I actually think that a lot more of the interesting, or maybe the right way to frame up the design problems will be a lot more about the experience, like the experience not of just using the phone or the glass or whatever it is, but like of, let's say, going to a restaurant. Like, what is it like to go into a restaurant? What are all the things that you do in a restaurant, or that matter to you, or that you might be talking about, and that technology can enhance? And then looking at the design problem, and where, all of the other different wearables are kind of like, ways in which we can make that experience better, rather than being like, what should I design for the phone? I think that it's more about framing it as an experience. And I think more and more of design become maybe less and less about the product, and more about the experience of doing something.
Too macro, according to your model, right? We need to get more micro about those experiences.
Maybe.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Julie.
Cool.
Appreciate you
Thank you
joining
so
us.
much.